The mornings had settled into a quiet, muted rhythm, much like the soft ticking of an old clock in a room that had long since lost its warmth. Each day began the same way, a cup of tea in my hands, sitting by the window, watching the play of shadows across the garden Henry once tended with such care. Since he passed, life had become a series of gentle silences, a quiet that wrapped around me like a shroud. At 68, a widow alone in a house too large and too empty, it was easy to feel invisible, as if the years themselves were swallowing me whole. I liked to believe I was sharp enough to see through the fading smiles of family, to sense the undercurrents beneath everyday conversations, and to keep the bills managed without a single slip. But recently, an unfamiliar fog had begun to cloud my mind, dulling my once keen senses. The occasional forgetting of where I placed my glasses, once scattered instances, became frequent enough to prick at my confidence. And the pills, the medicines I took diligently every morning, sometimes slipped by unnoticed. More than once, I found an empty blister pack where a pill should have been, or felt the telltale bitterness of a dose watered down. At first, I told myself it was the wear of a life well lived catching up. The body is a fragile vessel after all, and memories can play tricks as the years stretch on. But beneath the surface, unease gathered like dark clouds before a storm. Something wasn't right. I knew it deep down. Something far more sinister than the forgetfulness age can bring. Vanessa dismissed my concerns with practiced ease. "Mom, you're tired. You've been under stress. You're imagining things." Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but it carried an edge that cut through me. To everyone else, she appeared the devoted daughter-in-law, caring and dutiful. But behind her pale smile, I began to see the sharp glint of ambition, cold and merciless. It was one late afternoon I caught the truth in a moment that would forever sear itself into my memory. The sunlight was waning, the house cold in the creeping dusk. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she cleaned dishes, the sound light and empty. I moved slowly down the corridor, clenching a growing ache in my chest. I had started to notice the subtle discrepancies, the strange taste in my pills, the missing doses I could not explain. On that day, my suspicions turned to the undeniable. I saw her reach up to the top shelf, fingers brushing aside the packages and tins until she found the small bottle labeled with my name. Her hands trembled just slightly, but her movements were deliberate and practiced. She poured a few tablets into her palm, counting softly with her lips. Then, with the same quiet precision, she replaced a couple of my pills with sugar capsules she had hidden carefully behind the flour canister. Our eyes met, mine wide with shock, hers cold and unrepentant. There was no apology in that glance, no hesitation, only a chilling finality. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in a wild, frantic rhythm, but no sound escaped my lips. To speak then, to accuse, would be to hand her the victory. Vanessa had the power here, the house, the family's influence. My voice, already so faint, would be drowned in her calculated lies. So I wrapped myself in silence, biting back tears and anger, turning inward instead. The house grew heavier in the days that followed. I felt its weight pressing down upon me, making every breath laborious. My son David, caught in Vanessa's web, drifted further away. His eyes clouded when I tried to share my worries, his voice weary and resigned. "Mom, Vanessa cares for you. You need to rest. Don't make this harder on all of us." Love laced his words, but they were laced too with a painful blindness that cut deeper than any betrayal. I was left alone to bear the burden of suspicion, a prisoner in my own home. That solitude was suffocating. I wandered through familiar rooms that now felt foreign. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, a reminder of how fragile my grip on reality had become. At night, the silence was absolute, only broken by the ticking clock that seemed to mock me with its steady pulse. It measured my slipping clarity and tightening desperation. Yet beneath the sorrow, beneath the shock, a quiet fire began to ignite. This was no time for surrender. Though my body faltered, though my family's trust had been shattered, my mind remained sharp and alert. I was not the fragile woman they believed me to be. I was a mother who had held her family together through countless storms, a widow who knew the true weight of endurance. I began keeping detailed notes, a journal of each pill taken, each missed dose, every odd sensation that swept over me like a cold wave. I watched Vanessa closely, studying the patterns behind her smiles, the sly glances she cast when she thought no one was looking. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a map of her intentions and methods. I realized then that this was more than a blow to my health. It was an attack on my very being, the role I had played in this family, the respect and dignity I had earned. And while it wounded me deeply, it also steeled my resolve. I would not let myself be erased, diminished by her greed or deceit. So I retreated into silence. But it was not a silence of defeat. It was a silence of observation and patience. I told myself that no outburst or tear would reclaim what had been taken. Instead, I would be the quiet force in this home, watching, waiting, gathering strength. Night after night, I sat by the fading glow of my lamp, hands folded on the worn table. The house rested in darkness, and with it, my thoughts began to sharpen. Tears never came. Instead, a steady, determined heartbeat filled the void. I imagined the battles ahead, the hidden war waged in whispers, in silent waiting, in the cold calculus of truth and justice. Silence was my shield, a fortress protecting me from their scorn and suspicion, but truth would be my sword. And with that resolve, I braced myself for the fight to come. I never confronted Vanessa directly. To accuse her without indisputable proof would have been folly, handing her more power and alienating the very son who should have stood by me. Anger could be devastating if wielded without care. It could fracture what little remained of our fragile family and give Vanessa the upper hand. I had learned long ago that silence, when chosen deliberately, could be the most potent weapon. Retreating into quiet reflection was not defeat. It was the first step toward reclaiming control. My mind drifted back to the years I had devoted to this family. I replayed memories like faded films in my mind's eye, seeking both comfort and clarity. I thought of the nights spent at my son David's bedside during his childhood illnesses, the hospital visits when no one else showed up, and the endless chores that kept our household running. I recalled the mornings when Henry and I sat quietly over tea, our unspoken bond a source of warmth and strength. I also remembered how I had welcomed Vanessa into our lives, a young woman timid and unsure, worthy of kindness and trust. Those memories now clashed violently with the present. The respect I had earned through years of sacrifice was slipping away, replaced by suspicion and silent warfare. Vanessa had changed, her smiles no longer genuine but carefully constructed masks hiding greed and cold calculation. David, once so full of warmth, seemed a stranger, his eyes avoiding mine, his words clipped under Vanessa's watchful influence. It was a slow, creeping isolation that left me feeling as though I were fading away, unnoticed and unprotected. I understood then that Vanessa's betrayal was not a moment of weakness or frustration, but a calculated act of cruelty. Every missed peel, every dismissive word, every subtle manipulation had been carefully designed to weaken me and isolate me from those I loved. But I was not powerless. I had faced storms before, storms that could have broken me, but instead forged a quiet resilience deep inside. In the long nights that followed, I repeated to myself a solemn vow. Silence was my shield, truth my sword. These words became my refuge, a mantra that steadied my heart and sharpened my resolve. I would not cry out or plead. Instead, I would build a case so irrefutable, so carefully documented that the truth would no longer be avoidable. I sought allies hidden in plain sight. Harold, our trusted family lawyer, was the first. He was a man of integrity whose knowledge of our family's history went well beyond what most had noticed. Though I had rarely confided in him beyond legal matters, I trusted him now with a secret far more personal and dangerous. Communication had to be cautious and coded. Our conversations were sparse and wary, conducted by whispered phone calls and cryptic notes hidden within mundane letters. Every word, every phrase was carefully chosen to avoid alerting Vanessa or stirring suspicion in David. Yet Harold listened without hesitation, his voice calm and steady as he urged me forward. "Document everything," he said. "Missed appointments, changed prescriptions, strange remarks. We'll need everything laid bare to fight this." I followed his advice to the letter. I began keeping a meticulous journal, noting every moment of uncertainty, the exact times I took medication, the twinges of nausea or dizziness that came unbidden, the pills I found missing or replaced. I became a silent observer in my own home, watching Vanessa's subtle changes in expression, decoding the hidden messages in her carefully crafted kindness, tracing the patterns of deceit woven through her words. My secret weapon was a small recorder, cleverly concealed in the lining of a shawl I never left the house without. Several times, Vanessa let her guard down when she believed herself alone, speaking in hushed tones about her ambition, her disdain, her plans to control the family's wealth and suppress me entirely. Each captured whisper was a shard of truth I filed carefully, building an invisible dossier that no one could ignore when the time came. Vanessa's facade was brittle. Behind her polished surface lay a hunger for power that blinded her to one crucial fact. I was no longer the vulnerable old woman with fading memory she took me to be. I was watching, listening, documenting. I was gathering pieces of a story that would cut through her lies and reveal her for what she truly was. While she masqueraded as a devoted caregiver, controlling appointments and finances, I took back what power I could, securing important documents, moving papers to safer places, quietly ensuring that no door was left open for theft or manipulation. Every act was deliberate, slow, and measured. I could not afford mistakes. My strength lay in precision and patience. The loneliness that pressed down on me was unyielding, but it became a crucible that forged a new kind of strength within. All the years I had dedicated to this family, the sacrifices, the love, the endurance, were no longer invisible. They were the foundation of my resolve to stand my ground and reclaim my rightful place. Night after night, I sat by the gentle glow of my lamp, my hands folded on the weathered table as the quiet house held its breath around me. I rehearsed the battles ahead, not with fury or tears, but with calm determination and icy clarity. The war would not be won by shouting or rash actions. It would be a war of patience, of strategy, and of undeniable truth. Resolved, I knew beyond doubt that I was stronger than the circumstances forced upon me. I was the mother, the widow, the matriarch who had weathered countless storms. And now, with silence as my armor and truth as my sword, I would fight not only to survive, but to reclaim the life and family that had been stolen from me. This quiet war had begun in my heart, and soon it would echo through every corner of the home I once called sanctuary. I was ready to win. The first battle line I drew was around my medication. It seemed small and insignificant compared to the great losses I faced, but it was the cornerstone upon which my strength rested. I meticulously went over every prescription, side by side with pharmacy records and the pills actually found in my possession. Each irregularity was no accident. It was a contorted thread in the tapestry of betrayal Vanessa wove with such care. Every missing pill, each altered dose became a clue, a fragment of truth I could collect and wield. I adjusted my routines in barely noticeable ways, shifting the time I took medicine by minutes, refusing assistance from anyone but myself when handling the bottles. It was a quiet rebellion born of necessity and sharpened by experience. Vanessa watched, probably thinking I was slipping, but I was the one, unblinking, unshaken. I was learning the rhythms of her deceit, adapting like a watchful cat. Hidden in the folds of my shawl was my shield and evidence, a small recorder, silent and unassuming. Vanessa was careless at times, unaware that her whispered triumphs, her self-congratulating boasts, and the venom dressed as concern were being captured for eternity. I heard her on tape, boasting about how easily she controlled David, how she had the family's fate sealed tightly in her grip. I caught her muttering disdain for me, calling me a useless relic in her way, declaring her plans to take over every corner of our household. Those voices, cold and unguarded, were my most powerful ammunition, recorded proof to topple her facade. Listening to those secret recordings became a nightly ritual, one that filled me with both a bitter ache and an empowering certainty. Every inflection, every betraying pause crystallized an image of the woman who had been masquerading as a daughter-in-law, but was nothing more than a poison concealed behind a smile. Each recording, when paired with my detailed journal cataloging pills, unexplained bruises, odd remarks, and Vanessa's calculated smiles, formed the backbone of what would be an undeniable case. I entrusted all of this to Harold, our family lawyer, whose quiet presence was a balm against the storm raging inside me. His office, lined with stacks of grim tomes and the smell of leather, became the ground where my fragile claim to justice was forged. I entrusted all of this to Harold, our family lawyer, whose quiet presence was a balm against the storm raging inside me. His office, lined with stacks of grim tomes and the smell of leather, became the ground where my fragile claim to justice was forged. He was steady-eyed and unswayed by sentiment, focusing solely on the facts I brought him, a stack of notes, the recordings, medical prescriptions, and evidence of financial discrepancies. We spoke in hushed tones, no louder than a secret ourselves, careful to leave no traces for Vanessa's ears. Harold's advice was strategic and clear. You must build a timeline, Margaret. Show this is a pattern, deliberate and sustained. Medical records, pharmacy documentation, financial audits, we need them all. We would need to prove intent, not just a series of unfortunate events. I valued his steadiness, his respect for the gravity of betrayal wrapped in familial bonds. Day after day, I revisited my notes, reaffirming each suspicion with cold, hard facts. It was tedious, exhausting work, but it reminded me that I was my own strongest advocate. Each charted peel, each validated inconsistency was a step toward reclaiming not just my health, but my agency. Vanessa's influence over David was another battlefield altogether. I sensed the strain between them, caught in moments when his eyes would flicker with doubt, a hesitation that betrays the black and white loyalty Vanessa demanded. Those moments were rare but precious, reminders that David was not as blind as he appeared, just ensnared in a web nearly impossible for him to escape alone. I recorded these glimpses of vulnerability, hoping they might one day open the door back to him. Finances were yet another minefield. Vanessa had positioned herself as the gatekeeper, tightening her grip on accounts once jointly managed or solely mine. With Harold's assistance, I engaged a trusted financial controller, discreet and uncorruptible. Together, we untangled the web of transactions Vanessa had cast, identifying funds shifted without authorization or diverted to accounts I could not access. Progress was slow but steady. We moved assets quietly, transferring control back into my name, protecting what should never have been out of reach. Every secured document, every bank account reclaimed was a victory granted in silence. The house, once a cage holding me hostage to Vanessa's schemes, began to feel less like a prison and more like a chessboard upon which I could make moves unseen and unchallenged. I did not let anger blind me. Bitterness could only serve to hasten defeat. Instead, I embraced a cold clarity that made every injustice sharper but more manageable. The battle did not call for rashness, but precision, not outward rage, but internal steel. Nights were the time I allowed my mind to strategize in quiet detail. The soft amber lamplight illuminated stacks of papers and a steadily growing pile of transcriptions. Each piece of evidence connected to another, a web that no one could unravel without exposing the rot hidden beneath Vanessa's lies. The silence of the house, once suffocating, now felt charged with anticipation, a silent accomplice in the coming revolution. This slow, persistent campaign was exhausting, but it was mine. Each passing day I grew stronger, more focused. I was no longer the passive victim confined by age and circumstance. I was the architect of my own justice, a mother defending her legacy. The war was taking form, a cold calculation of moves, a quiet orchestration of truth against deceit. I stood firm behind my silence and conviction, patient for the decisive moment when the evidence could no longer be denied or hidden. The victory I sought would not be won by thunderous confrontation, but with the unshakable weight of truth. And when it came, that truth would be my sword, the sword with which I would cut down the house of cards Vanessa built upon lies and betrayal. With every carefully arranged piece of evidence in hand and the financial control steadily slipping back into my grip, the time to turn plans into action had arrived. Yet this phase demanded more than mere urgency. It required a poised, calculated approach engendered by years of endurance and a sharp mind honed through hardship. I knew impulsive moves bred chaos, but calm, relentless precision built unshakable foundations. The foremost priority was reclaiming control over my health, the very core of my independence that Vanessa had eroded through her poisonings and neglect. Drawing on the extensive records I had compiled, I initiated discreet contact with the medical board via Harold, who expertly navigated the sensitive bureaucracy. I presented them with my documentation, daily logs, tampered prescriptions, and those damning hidden recordings, which collectively wove a story impossible to dismiss. The medical community responded with a professionalism that restored fragments of my shaken confidence. They swiftly arranged for an independent nurse, unaffiliated with the household, to manage my medication administration. This measure was a critical barrier against Vanessa's interference, severing her direct control and cutting off the poison she used as a weapon. In the quiet aftermath, I felt a cautious optimism bloom. A vital blockade now stood between me and harm. Strengthening my health safeguards was just the initial step. Alongside this, I began to unravel Vanessa's hold on the family's finances. While she spent her days with arrogant ease, convinced of her invulnerability, I worked quietly behind the scenes with the trusted financial controller Harold had introduced. Through paper trails and painstaking audits, we identified countless unauthorized transfers and convoluted diversions she had orchestrated. Swift yet subtle, the legal maneuvers to revoke Vanessa's access unfolded meticulously. Signatures were replaced, credit cards canceled, and power of attorney revoked, all discreet, ensuring Vanessa remained blissfully unaware of her diminishing grip. Each document signed, an authorization rescinded, siphoned the control she had stolen, transforming money from a tool of subjugation back into an instrument of my empowerment. Reclaiming legal and financial sovereignty was deeply personal, a course correction that echoed loudly within the confines of our fractured household. Whispered, unspoken victories accumulated daily as assets flowed back under my name and authority. The house, once a bastion of her control, began its slow transformation into the sanctuary I had always envisioned, a space shaped by my strength rather than submission. This reclamation extended beyond documents and accounts. The physical space I inhabited held symbols of my life, memories carefully tucked away amidst the chaos. Collecting photographs of Henry and me, heartfelt letters, and old heirlooms Vanessa had sidelined or hidden, I boxed them with solemn care. These weren't mere possessions, but tangible threads of my identity and legacy, tokens of my history risked to be erased. Each item returned to its rightful place was an act of resistance. The walls that once echoed with betrayal and silence began resonating again with quiet dignity and resilience. In these small but meaningful restorations, my sense of self re-emerged from the shadows cast by years of deception. Meanwhile, Vanessa carried on in her assumed dominion, her composure unshaken as she performed her role as the family's unseen puppeteer. Her interactions with David were polished performances, a mask of grace concealing ambition's ruthless undercurrent. The arrogance born of belief in untouchability only deepened my resolve. If she thought herself invincible, she had yet to reckon with the undercurrents swelling beneath her feet. Navigating the intricate financial landscape demanded utmost discretion and thorough attention. Meetings with lawyers and controllers took place behind closed doors, discussions veiled in lowered voices and locked privacy. The extraction of control piece by piece was tedious, yet imperative. Careless missteps could unravel months of progress in an instant. Yet every ledger corrected, every account secured, fortified my fortress of independence. I watched the tide turn with cautious satisfaction, each reclaimed asset a step away from subjugation, a step closer to justice. Emotionally, the toll was heavy. This struggle transcended mere documents. It cut into the heart of my family, fractured by lies and silence. I maintained a steely demeanor, refusing to be baited into bitterness or rashness. Instead, I armed myself with clarity and strategic calm, knowing that the battle demanded more than passion, it needed precision. Nights stretched long into contemplative hours. Bathed in amber lamplight, I pored over scores of evidence, transcriptions, medical notes, financial statements, a detailed mosaic of betrayal ready to be unveiled. Each connecting thread tightened the net that would ensnare the lies Vanessa sustained. The house, once an oppressive shell, now seemed to lean in expectantly, a silent witness to the justice silently rising within it. This relentless pursuit, exhausting yet wholly mine, sharpened the contours of my newfound strength. No longer the frail woman whispered about in the shadows, I had become the architect of my fate, defining the terms of my legacy with deliberate care. The war morphed into a strategic dance, an intricate, measured orchestration of patience and timing. Beneath my steady exterior raged a calculated storm, a quiet reclamation poised to shatter illusions. I stood unwavering behind my silence and conviction, wary but resolute, awaiting the moment when the amassed truth would become undeniable, piercing through deceit's deepest shadows. The triumph I sought would not roar with thunderous confrontation. It would arrive with the irresistible gravity of indisputable evidence. When that day finally dawned, truth itself would become my sword. With it, I would dismantle the fragile house Vanessa had erected, a house of cards precariously built on treachery, lies, and betrayal. And in doing so, reclaim not only my home and legacy, but my dignity and the respect long denied. This was no longer merely a battle. It was the rebirth of everything I held dear. I was prepared to wield the truth, steady and unrelenting, until justice was served. The moment was upon us. The day that had hovered at the edge of my thoughts for so long, now standing firm and undeniable in the still air of the house. David and Vanessa returned with the confident steps of those who believed they had already won, unaware that the foundation beneath them had quietly shifted beyond their control. I felt the air thicken with tension, a muted calm stretched taut, like the silence before a storm's first thunder. The living room, once a theater of whispered accusations and silent battles, was now the setting for truths long buried but never forgotten. I stood there, steady and calm, the months of preparation resting in my hands as I placed the thick folder of evidence upon the polished table. Each document, recording, and medical report inside was a testament to endurance and silent strength, the unmasking of years of deceit. As their eyes fell upon the folder and the small recorder beside it, the illusion of control that Vanessa had nurtured so carefully began to crumble. I pressed play, and her voice, once hidden behind closed doors, now echoing clearly, filled the room. There was the confession no one expected to hear. Admissions of manipulation, sabotage, and greed laid bare by the very words she thought were protected by distance and secrecy. Vanessa's smile flickered and faltered, the mask slipping as she grasped the weight of exposure. Her eyes widened, briefly betraying the shock that no rehearsed response could disguise. David's gaze, however, was a storm of confusion and pain. The man who had walked into the house with his wife's confidence was now grappling with the fracturing of his understanding, the knowledge that the woman he trusted had woven a tapestry of lies around his life. I spoke calmly, my voice steady as I wove the narrative that the evidence told, each fact cutting through Vanessa's defenses. You came here expecting to finalize your dominion over my life, my health, and my finances. But this is the truth, our truth, and it changes everything. With methodical care, I guided them through the medical records where doses had vanished and medications were swapped, through the financial statements bearing Vanessa's fingerprints where they shouldn't have been, through the delicate threads of deception she had spun that tied herself tightly to our family's affairs. The house held its breath as the truth thundered softly but relentlessly in the space we occupied. Vanessa stood mute, her calculated facade shattered in silence, while David's conflicted sorrow spoke volumes. The son I loved was lost in a storm of disbelief, torn between loyalty and awakening. I met their eyes without anger, realizing that emotion was a luxury I could not afford. "You believed me weak," I said quietly, but with unyielding strength. "You thought I would fade quietly, silenced and forgotten. But I am here, whole, vigilant, and resolute." There was no room for vengeance in my words, only a fierce reclaiming of what was mine by right, dignity, respect, and home. Vanessa's attempts at protest were swallowed by the weight of irrefutable evidence, her once commanding presence reduced to fragile silence. David turned to me then, his eyes wet with the weight of years missed and truths newly found. In that moment, I saw his pain, his regret, and a flicker of hope, a hope that the family might still mend despite the deep betrayals. The confrontation concluded not in chaos, but in the stillness of shattered illusions. No grandeur of rage or tears marked its end. Instead, the profound silence of justice served with steady hands. In the quiet aftermath, a new chapter hovered on the horizon. The home, once fractured by hidden wounds, began to hint at healing. The shadows that had held me prisoner now receded as truth lit the corners where lies had lurked. Vanessa's empire, so meticulously built on deceit and manipulation, was collapsing quietly but irrevocably. I saw in her eyes the dawning acceptance of defeat, the realization that the fortress she had claimed was built on unstable ground. David stood beside me, no longer the distant son, but a man caught between past errors and the possibility of redemption. The family's future hung delicately between them, poised for either renewal or further fracture. I felt the weight of victory settle softly on my shoulders, not a triumphant shout, but the resolute peace of a battle hard won. The mother who had been silenced and sidelined was reborn, strong and unwavering. The house, the family, the legacy, all were mine to nurture and protect once more. And I would do so not with bitterness or vengeance, but with quiet strength, patience, and the unshakable power of truth. The days that followed the confrontation unfurled like a quiet dawn after a long, oppressive night. The house, once heavy with tension and unspoken grievances, began to breathe easier. The oppressive shadows cast by betrayal slowly receded, replaced by a gentle light of possibility and renewal. Vanessa's absence left a quiet space, not harsh or empty, but full of the subtle promise of healing and peace long denied. The fortress she had built crumbled silently, revealing the fragile bones beneath, while I stood steady, a survivor reclaiming her rightful place. I moved into a smaller home, one purchased discreetly with savings I had carefully hidden away. It was modest, stripped of the grand illusions and fraught memories of the family estate, but it held something far more valuable: freedom. Here, I could rebuild myself and my life without the clawing presence of manipulation and deceit. The walls bore no witness to false smiles or whispered betrayals. They only reflected quiet dignity and calm resolve. I moved into a smaller home, one purchased discreetly with savings I had carefully hidden away. It was modest, stripped of the grand illusions and fraught memories of the family estate, but it held something far more valuable: freedom. Here, I could rebuild myself and my life without the clawing presence of manipulation and deceit. The walls bore no witness to false smiles or whispered betrayals. They only reflected quiet dignity and calm resolve. Each morning, sunlight spilled gently across the worn kitchen table where I sipped my tea and let the warmth settle deep into my bones. The silence was no longer stifling. It was a balm, soothing the relentless ache that had accompanied so many endless nights. In the routine of daily life, I found strength. In ordinary moments, I rediscovered joy. Memories came and went, some sharp and bittersweet, others tender and comforting. The ache of betrayal still lingered, a ghost of past wounds, but it no longer defined me. The silent strength I had cultivated through years of patience and watchfulness was now my fortress. I reminded myself often that silence had been my shield and truth my sword. David and I remained distant, the chasm between us wide and complicated by years of pain and misunderstanding. Yet there was hope, fragile and tentative, that healing might come with time and honest conversation. Forgiveness was not immediate, nor was it certain, but the possibility was enough to temper my heart with patience. I understood now that rebuilding trust would be a slow, deliberate act, brick by fragile brick. Vanessa's memory lingered like a faint echo, an ever-present reminder of how deeply ambition and greed can poison what should be sacred. But I refused to let bitterness define my days. Instead, I carried a quiet resolve to live fully and authentically, drawing strength from survival rather than suffering. My grandchildren's laughter often filled the rooms, bright and unburdened, rekindling warmth where shadow had dwelled. Their innocence was a precious gift, a reminder that life, despite its hardships, always offers new beginnings. Family, imperfect and fragile as it was, remained my greatest treasure and motivation. Sitting by the window in the golden light of late afternoon, I often opened my journal, the pages filled with the story of resilience and rebirth. No longer a tale of silent despair, it was now a testament to the power of endurance and the quiet reclaiming of one's rightful place. My home, this new sanctuary, is more than just a collection of walls and rooms. It holds the essence of reclaimed dignity, a symbol of quiet victories won, not with shouting, but with steadfast courage. On many dusky evenings, I whisper to the fading light. They tried to erase me, but silence was my shield and truth my sword. I am still here. And with that, I close my journal and look forward, ready to greet tomorrow, unafraid, unbroken, and wholly myself.